Hello, everybody. Yay, I'm so excited. Today I have Sarah Anderson from Cintrifuse on. I'm so
Hi.
excited that I could get you to join.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So for those of you that don't know Sarah, she's super awesome. In Cincinnati, runs a fund of funds there, is like very, if you're like someone within the tech community and you're going through Cincinnati, definitely try to get a meeting when we're
Yeah, definitely reach out.
um, when we're seeing people again. So I'll try to explain your background, and I'll try to also explain Cintrifuse, but then just feel free to jump right in anytime I start to go around.
Sure. Yeah.
So you grew up in Florida, and you majored in what, international health and economics. That's really cool. And you're an athlete, student athlete.
Yeah, pole vaulting.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so cool. Do you still like run and stuff?
You're funny you ask. I did start pole vaulting again last year and competed in masters and ended up winning the national championship. So that was super fun and
I
totally
swear you
unexpected.
did not prep me for this. So I don't know. Do you pole vault?
It's a good hobby. It's a very good hobby. I recommend it to everybody.
Oh, that is so interesting. I've never done that before. It's just the one where you're running and then you jump over the pole.
That's it. Yeah, you run with the pole and you jump over a high bar, and the higher the bar, the better the jump, basically.
Huh, that's so interesting. Oh, I like that hobby. I'm gonna have to ask you about that later. Okay, and then you were in finance for a long time, both in California, well, in LA, and in San Francisco as well. You were like at RBC. Oh, I like that. They manage some funds that I'm in.
Yeah, RBC and then JP Morgan, both on the investment banking side, working with tech and digital media companies.
And then what brought you to Ohio? Because you're not
My
from.
husband.
Ah,
I'm a trailing spouse.
trailing, become the leader's spouse. Um, and then you work at Cintrifuse, and so Cintrifuse is really cool to me because I feel like it's such like wraparound services, if you will, of like that you guys manage the fund of funds, but you have all these good corporate relationships, and you have a lot of um, resources and things that you provide to the startup community, and so it's kind of like all the various pieces coming together. And then you guys renovated like a really historic building in Cincinnati, correct?
Yeah, yeah. So the way I like to explain it is because it is fairly complicated. We have a lot of activities circling around the startup ecosystem. It's a one-stop shop for startups, is how it is set up. So we are meant to provide support to startups regardless of their stage, category, basically no matter where they are. We can provide support either through introducing them to early customers to do beta testing, helping them raise capital through venture relationships, helping them with talent, helping them with mentors. We have a host of people that are charged with different aspects of that, is kind of how I think of it. And the co-working space, we have a 35,000 foot co-working space located in the over the Rhine neighborhood of Cincinnati. It was 3 historical buildings that were combined into one big building.
Oh, that must have been some renovation project.
It was a 4-year renovation, but beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And it's a really great oasis for startups and the startup community to come in, work together. We have a lot of programming and education that we put on and host when we're in person, right? I mean, I think right now it's a little bit staggered. But yeah, so that's Cintrifuse.
And then how do so like Cincy Tech is the economic development organization for that region, right? How do like you guys work together with like the economic development side of things?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So Cincy Tech is our ESP. So the state, provides a lot of funding to the startup ecosystem throughout the state. And to do that, they have different pockets that are led by one ESP. So like Cleveland is a pocket. They have an ESP that leads that geography. Cincinnati is another pocket. Cincy Tech leads this geography from the state's perspective in the startup ecosystem. And what that means is basically they are trying to organize the funding from the state into different entities, if that makes sense. So we do receive at the Cintrifuse kind of parent company level, we receive state funding that is matched by private dollars. And all of that funding goes towards helping with the development of startups.
Okay. And then you guys are focusing on the tech community, where Cincy Tech would be focusing on, tech community through you guys, but then largely does like all sorts of businesses and kind of like businesses.
Yeah, well, sorry, to answer your question more directly, we work very closely with Cincy Tech. They are a venture fund, so they're investing directly into startups in the ecosystem, right? So they're writing seed checks to basically all of our seedling babies in the region, and supporting them as part of their portfolio, as part of the Cincy Tech portfolio. We think of us more as hosting the startups, but not having an equity relationship with the startups, right? So we work very closely with Cincy Tech's portfolio companies when they need to raise, or if they need new customer relationships, or if they need a place to work, things like that. We're working with them. So it's a very close relationship, but it's not, it's not like a monetary relationship.
Okay. Oh, cool. And then what kinds of things are you having to do to like prep the co-working space for everyone coming back? Are you guys having to do that kind of stuff, or is it big you kind of don't have to do too much?
So we've been open. The building is open, especially for our private offices. We have a lot of private office tenants, and then for members that do want to congregate, as teams. It's masks only, always now. I mean, Ohio has mandated for the entire state wearing masks. So, and there was a lot of prep that went involved. Laura Hughes, who kind of leads our building operations, really did a lot of work to make sure people felt safe. We were communicating very actively. She created a group of other co-working spaces in Cincinnati to understand best practices and optimize for things that are going on and communicating things that are going on. So it changes a lot. We have to abide by all of the state measures, all the guidance, but there has been definitely the private offices are back working. And there's been, several members, even our team members, that have been going back into the building. So
that's nice. A little bit. It's nice that everyone can kind of like see people again.
Right. It's not,
in a way.
It's not 100% isolation, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we kind of talked about this, but so Cintrifuse works to make the Cincinnati area the #1 tech startup hub in the Midwest. Why you got to be like that?
We're working on it.
And then talk about so like why this region is so great, and sort of what elements you guys have in Cincinnati that are really helping to build such a strong foundation for the tech community there.
Yeah, and I think when we set up Cintrifuse, and I think this, but we really looked at what Ann Arbor and Detroit were doing, and some of their best practices. So, and Renaissance Early Stage Fund really helped us kind of benchmark different practices that we wanted to put into place. And I think
I was like singing you guys' praises.
Yeah. We have done quite a bit of work with other ecosystems that, naturally want to build a startup community within their own geographies. And I think one of the things we've come away with is the primary differentiator for Cincinnati is our large corporations. We have a lot of them. So we have a very strong density of Fortune 500 companies for the size of Cincinnati. B, they're very involved, right? So they're committed to this ecosystem development, and they're committed to it for a few different reasons. One, they want to stay competitive and on the forefront of talent recruitment. And they can't do that if the population continues to age. So startup entrepreneurship tends to be a younger demographic. It tends to be a more nimble demographic. And it also aids in the importation of talent, right?
Yeah.
The second thing is they want to make sure that they are on the cutting edge of their own innovation, that they're seeing eyes and ears into new trends that are happening within their core business units. So they're very vested, and not just by voice, but by purse, right? And helping to support this startup community. And we haven't seen that in any other geography we've been to, especially at this level.
Yeah, I have been really surprised. Like you guys have had such great success, and I think like in Michigan, I know that like Renaissance does a ton of stuff with the corporates, but I find like a lot of times, like in Detroit, you go and there's a little bit. Maybe it's more like the auto industry is like this, but I feel like it's a little bit more like siloed off. Where if they're gonna nurture a startup, they want to have it at like internal, so that it's not like something that they're working on that everybody knows about. And so I feel like there is sort of like a wall up there where like it's like you either like have some sort of in to one of the auto companies, or like they're not up. It's not like I regularly see like people from the different auto companies coming to tech events or anything like that and within the Michigan community.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see that too with some of our corporations, wanting to keep things very close to the chest and make sure that what they're working on is proprietary, remains proprietary. But I do think that there's a natural culture to want to develop a much broader network, to want to create feelers out onto the coast and into different geographies and into different categories to see what's going on, even if it just is informational and educational. One of the biggest differences is, like I mentioned, the ability of our corporations not just to talk about it, but to actually fund it. And, the corporations created Cintrifuse, right? They were the genesis of Cintrifuse existence back in 2012. And it was created by an organization in Cincinnati called the Cincinnati Business Committee, CBC, which is made up of the top 50.
Great name.
Right? Isn't it? I mean, it's so creative. It's made up of the top 50 corporations in Cincinnati by revenue.
Okay.
And they often do and we haven't seen this type of organization in other geographies. So I think this is a huge differentiator, because they do look at Cincinnati as an overall geography to say, what do we need as a group to make ourselves more competitive, to make the region more attractive? And the genesis of Cintrifuse was basically the realization that a lot of these big Fortune 500s are moving, and the era of importing elephants into geographies was over, right? You were no longer able to import an Oracle or a Delta or others, right?
Okay.
So building something from the ground up was really what was going to keep Cincinnati competitive. And so that was the startup ecosystem. And then that was the genesis of Cintrifuse to support that ecosystem.
Oh, that's so great. I love that. I find that to be totally true too. Like, I mean, you see like the impact that a lot of these startups that have grown up within various communities and have stayed in various communities, and then people are like leaving and starting other companies. Like it does, there's a lot of just residual benefits, or like
totally. And you see that in Indianapolis, right? Like Exact Target had now spun out several new startups from executives that left that company. You also see it in Columbus, right? Yeah. And so, yeah, I think the offspring of some of these big exits is meaningful. We have not had our big exit in Cincinnati yet. There's a few that I think may take that role, but not yet.
No, that's interesting. Do you find that you guys see a lot more like early acquisitions by the corporates, because they're kind of, that's the point. They're like, oh, they're just big enough for that seems like a viable, interesting technology purchase.
Not locally, not necessarily like local companies. We have a few examples of that, but P&G made some public acquisitions last year of some D2C companies, and we have seen some of our LPs just picking off different capabilities, and a lot of it is trying to flex a new muscle and trying to test new markets. So we have seen that, not so much on the local companies, but what we do see a lot is talent recruitment back and forth. So both from the startups, corporations recruiting from the startups, right? And also startups spinning out of the corporations. So one of our best startups here, Vindley, they spun out of Kroger, was an executive from Kroger, spun out because he saw a major industry challenge and created a startup around it. We have other examples like Listener, which spun out of, as an employee at P&G. We have another one called Connexus, which was an employee at Cincinnati Bell.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of these happening, and I think the corporations do provide a really great source of talent for our startups.
Yeah, that is true. That's funny because I can't think of a couple of examples like that, or even just people that were at like large corporations that were so good that were kind of like hanging around. So like sort of the opposite of what I just said of like, oh yeah, they are like at the events, and like once they get ingrained in the community, they just get stolen away.
Yeah, there's a lot of poaching that goes on, but in both directions, right?
More fun. Okay, so let's see. I can actually ask you one of these questions that we had planned to talk about that we haven't gotten to any of them. You guys manage a fund of funds, which for people who don't know what a fund of funds is, so a fund of funds fundraises from a bunch of LPs, and then which are a lot of times corporations, and in your cases corporations, and then invest in venture capital firms that then invest in portfolio companies or in startup companies. So you guys manage a fund of funds, which is up here. And you work closely with the investors, with the venture capital firms that you invest in, and with other venture capitalists. And you also work with these corporations, and you nurture a lot of startups. So how is Cintrifuse advising community members across like that whole spectrum of people to navigate the coming year?
So we have been doing.
You have all the answers. That would be great.
I mean, I wish. The challenge is the answers keep changing. Right? I mean, it's about a 2-week cycle is what we've found with some of our VCs. Like it feels like every 2 weeks the sentiment changes just slightly.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's been really tough for a lot of startups. Now, the way that we're advising people currently, and we do a lot of work with startups that are going out to fundraise, is they have to have a COVID story. They have to have an urgency story. So VCs are investing for sure. VCs do not want to miss this vintage year because they anticipate, because of the valuation fluctuations and what happened during the great financial crisis in 2008, right? 2009 and 2010 are some of the best vintage years we've seen in the decade.
Oh, right. That's so interesting. I had not thought of it like that.
But while VCs are investing, they're investing opportunistically. And some of the opportunities that they are seeing right now are incredible. So for a startup, let's say, and you guys just did this report on which categories are seeing tailwinds and which categories are currently seeing headwinds. So let's say there's a company that's going to be that does remote work. Okay, so Zoom is a really great example. Any VC in their right mind would fund Zoom right now, right? But if you are doing, let's say, some form of enterprise CRM type of capability, long sales cycle.
Who's not?
I mean, you're gonna have some problems fundraising, right? It's gonna be hard. And so that's one of the things we're trying to advise. Any startup that goes out needs to have a contactless story. Any startup that goes out needs to have an urgency story, right? Why now? Why are they raising now? Why is it important now? And they need to demonstrate tailwinds at all costs, right? Don't make things up, but there has to be relevancy. If you don't currently have relevancy in this market, VCs are not going to pay attention because there's too much other noise. Now, one of the things that we've really been digging into, and I don't know that I have a good answer to this, but this is a temporary environment, right? We know it's not going to last forever.
Yeah.
And so
hopefully.
I mean, hopefully. And the shorter it lasts, the better off we all are. But VCs are making long-term bets on short-term changes. So why? Right? Why is that happening? One of the things that we've been able to determine is that a lot of these consumer behaviors are likely going to be persistent even post-pandemic, right? So, and we've already seen this from some of the announcements that corporations have made, but there's going to be a lot more remote work just going to happen. There's going to be a lot more video conferencing. Now that, when we all used to do phone calls all day long, right? Yeah. And conference calls. Now we're going to be doing Zoom calls all day long, right? If we're not in person. So
yeah, it is so true.
What they're betting on, telehealth is another really great example. All of these doctors that never believed in telehealth, never adopted telehealth, now are being forced to have telehealth capabilities. Well, now that they have it and they see the unit economics that are involved in it and the amount of billing and time, et cetera, they're probably not going to go back to 100% in-person visits. On top of consumers now see how convenient it is, who may not have been forced to use it in the past. Similarly, so like a lot of these behaviors, VCs really think are going to be persistent post-pandemic, and those are the bets that they're making. So startups have to be able to demonstrate not only tailwind stories, but persistence stories post-pandemic.
Oh, interesting.
And so, we're seeing some startups that are getting a lot of traction, right? It's the new normal. But we're seeing a lot of startups that are also struggling, and VC saying, I need more data. It doesn't, the consumer behavior is shifting away from this category, things like that. So,
yeah, I was kind of telling you before, I like when I can say like, oh yeah, when we were talking before the cameras were on, it makes me feel like I'm like Ellen DeGeneres or something like that. Sure, those kinds of things. When we were talking before, I was kind of talking about the analysis we just did on the business impact of COVID on different sectors. And the one for the tech community was like kind of all of the sea of sadness that was this entire analysis. It was kind of like the one bright light was that like it does seem that like a lot of the startup community across, consumer products across, IT companies, life science companies, whatever, were saying that they had felt there were no companies that we talked to, and we talked to a lot of companies that said that they felt completely unprepared to go for remote work, versus when we talked to like restaurants or we talked to whatever, like they were like, yeah, this hit. Oh no, we were completely unprepared. Like
delivery, point of sale systems,
we didn't have a website. There was tons of companies that were saying like they didn't have a website, didn't have delivery, didn't have anything like that. And the tech community, largely, nobody said that they were unprepared. There were some that were like, yeah, we were pretty unprepared, but whatever.
But now that those restaurants do have those capabilities, right? The bet is that even post-pandemic, they're not going to get rid of them.
Yeah. So then we saw revenue loss for tech companies was significantly less than for the others. So it's like companies that are, like brick and mortar, were saying they had lost, most of them had lost more than 50% of their revenue, whereas tech companies, most of them had not lost at least 50% of their revenue. A lot of them had actually gained during this time, as you said. And then we also found that tech companies were more likely to get approved for any of the COVID relief funding. So like they actually were approved for like PPP loans and the IEDL loans more often than non-tech companies.
Why would that be?
Companies. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're so used to reporting. I mean, this is kind of just like, because I was like, wait, why would this be? I
Right.
think it's because they're so used to reporting financials, everything about to like their investors. Whereas like a retail company is just like, I've never had to fill out something like this before, or like a mom and pop shop that doesn't really even have much outside funding. They don't really know how to go about putting together financial statements, or they don't keep track, or they have like a like ledger that they write on. A lot of companies like they don't have anyone internally, and they don't work with anybody that has like financial acumen to be able to like report out the best thing to the banks in order to like present the best story of what they'll do with the money, and so they were getting often. And I think like we saw that like pretty unanimously across the board. And it wasn't like, oh, 100% of tech companies versus like 2% of brick and mortar companies, but it was a significant amount more tech companies. So that was a kind of nice to at least see somebody was,
So
oh,
interesting.
well, they're not losing all the revenue and they're actually getting some of this money. That's so great.
Yeah. A glimmer of hope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in the sea of crap that was this analysis was just depressing. Um, but yeah, so I was kind of like, okay, yeah, tech guys. Um, so that leads me to my next question. Speaking of tech guys, so I think across the Midwest we have like a huge diversity and inclusion problem in the tech community, and I mean it not just across the Midwest, but I'll just speak as the Midwest because that's where we are. Um, and so you guys being kind of like this community builder within Cincinnati, and given the fact that Cincinnati does have a very large Black population, very, very diverse community as is, how do you feel like, what do you think that the tech community in the Midwest could be doing to more aggressively build a more diverse and inclusive community?
Yeah, I mean, I think, a lot of the things that we've been talking about, because I think we have a big role to play in this conversation, just given where we sit within the Cincinnati community. And part of what we've been talking about is whatever solutions are put on the table need to be sustainable, and they need to be able to move the needle, right? So, I think several of our corporations who are also our investors have come out and committed a certain amount of capital to this cause to do different things. Some are investing in suppliers and vendors. Some are, hiring in specific places, things like that. I think that it's not going to be a silver bullet. It's going to be multiple long-term strategies that help change the landscape, right? So different things that we have discussed are, things like hiring, ensuring that our membership base at Cintrifuse is diverse, recruiting in startups and entrepreneurs that are diverse, that have diverse teams. Working with our GPs, right? Working with our VCs and saying, hey, look, we're expecting you to have representation, not just within your partnership, but also within your portfolio of companies that may have minority representation or underrepresented founders, right? And so we're starting to look through all of that to see, where are we to set a baseline? And then B, where do we want to be, and start working towards that.
Yeah, I think it's also, I think like we see a lot of tracking between when there are like women or people of color that are investors, what their portfolio company looks like. And so I think if you look at one firm, you don't necessarily see the correlation. But when we look at like all of the firms and then like track the numbers over time, like you can see like very clearly like the years that there's like more investors that are people of color. There'll be more CEOs of companies that are people of color getting funded, and then women. Like we noticed that like those trends track pretty closely over time. And then I also see like a lot with boards. So like if a board of directors is more diverse, then we see a lot more like board a lot more like portfolio company or even investor representation as well. So
Yeah. And I think too, us as LPs, we have, and I've talked to some of my peers about this as well, to see like, where are you coming out? What can we or what should we do? And I think there's a lot of hesitation among financial investors to make, bold statements. But I do think that as an LP and as an investor, we do have a responsibility to ensure that our VCs are maintaining our own mission, right?
yeah.
So that's a lot of the work that's in front of us to ensure that they're clear on that. What does that mean? And B, we're kind of enforcing it. So, we've talked a lot about it. It's something that we take very seriously. I do think it can't just be a today conversation, right? It has to be an ongoing conversation and in the minds of decision makers over a long period of time in order to really create change. So, yeah, I don't have a perfect answer, but it is something that we're very cognizant of.
Yeah, I do think like tracking it too is like really helpful. I'm always like, everyone keep tracking and talking about it, because I think a lot of people kind of gets hidden in the details, or like I notice a lot, and I like just posted about this. But that I've noticed a lot of times, like people will say like, oh yeah, we've invested in like founders that are women or founders that are people of color, and they'll like be like bannering that around like on a little flag, like, hey, oh, we've got,
here's the one, or here's the one or two. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'll be like, well, how many of the CEOs are women or people of color? And oh, well, no, none of them. But like the founder was. And I was like, well, the founder isn't even involved with the company. Who, like, what? Like, I can't be waving that. Stop waving the flag.
Well, that's a really good point. A lot of VCs don't even calibrate. They don't even know. And I think those are some of the worst offenders, right? Because they don't even look at their numbers. And then when they do, they're like, oh man, yeah, this is pretty awful.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, I will move on. So Cintrifuse, and we're so short on time, so I'll ask you one more fun question so that I don't hold you forever. So what would you say is one big event in Cincinnati, or big gathering or whatever in Cincinnati, that once everybody is able to go out of their houses and things, like if people in the Midwest should like all go to this thing in Cincinnati?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked. Actually, that's a really good question. So every year, Cintrifuse and Cincy Tech host what it's called the liquidity event. It's surrounding both of our annual meetings. So we partner our annual meetings together.
Oh, cool.
And we have a liquidity event, which is a craft beer and bourbon tasting.
Oh.
And a whole bunch of local.
In 2021, everyone's just gonna be like, oh, finally.
Amazing. It's always held at the Mercantile Library. A lot of our corporate LPs are there. VCs from across the Midwest and on the coast come. Last year we had 60 VCs join, and it's so much fun. But that's the night before the Cincy Tech Big Breakfast. And so that is an awesome event. You get to see a lot of startups actually demoing their wares in one room. So especially for VCs, it's just a really like productive use of time. And then that's followed by our annual meeting, the Cintrifuse annual meeting, which is much less fun and interactive, but it's a really 24-hour, power-packed, productive time in Cincinnati, and it's typically end of October, early November. The date changes every year, but
yeah, I had it on our calendar for this year at Entry Point. Like I was like, oh yeah, find out when this is going on, and it was like early March that I was gonna reach out, and then I was like, oh, okay,
it's not happening this year, unfortunately. We're still having our annual meeting, but it's going to be virtual.
Yeah.
So
I know, it's such a bummer. Yeah, that sounds so cool. And I also really like when people in the Midwest have, I'm just going to say this as like Michigan person and an Ohio person are on the, The rest of the states, I really like when people do things that are like that night and then the next morning there's a thing, because it's so much easier to like travel in, go to the thing at night and know you have something to go to in the morning, and then
Right.
travel out like after that. So I do love that, and I
Right.
definitely want to go to that.
Makes it more productive.
Do you just buy tickets, or how do you find out about that?
So it's usually posted on our website and Cincy Tech's website. So you can check either one. We also distribute a newsletter. So if you go to Cintrifuse's website, you can sign up for the newsletter, and then you would get notice of it once we send out the save the date. Usually we send out the save the date midsummer, like June or so. But it's
okay.
anytime.
Yeah, I definitely want to go to that. So
yeah. Next year. I mean, it's a must. It's a must event. Like these bourbons, you can't get them anywhere else. And Cincy Tech kind of has a secret weapon around a bourbon connoisseur, and so he helps us source, and it's really fun.
Yeah, that does sound so awesome. Okay, I love it. All right, I will leave you alone. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And I will hopefully talk to you soon, and I will hopefully see you in over a year at that thing.
Gosh, it feels like forever, doesn't it? Yeah, and if any of your listeners want to get in touch with me, they should feel free to just reach out on Twitter at Adams_Anderson is my Twitter, and we're happy to dig in and help with startups.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much. And I will talk to you soon.
Thanks. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.